Okay, it is 6:30 on July 8th, 2020. Welcome to our July 8th meeting. I'm Roger Arnold, Vice Chair. We're waiting for Claudette Brochu, Chair, who will join us and then resume the sharing of this meeting. In the interim, I'm hearing feedback. I don't know why. It's not my computer. Okay. Okay, so in the, I don't know why.
Mary's maybe?
Yeah, let me mute. Okay, better. Yeah, okay, great. So yes, I should say beginning that we're conducting this meeting on Zoom due to COVID-19. We have the authorization from our legislative body. I should let you know that Robert Gear, Mary Layton, John Langus, are here from the board. We were joined by Herb Durfee, town manager, and Miranda Bergmeyer, the town manager's assistant. As I mentioned, we're waiting for Claudette Brochu to join us later. We're conducting this meeting via Zoom. We have posted this for the public, and it is being recorded, and that members of the public have the ability to participate. I didn't do the reading, but I think that was the gist. I should remind you that if you are participating via Zoom and you would like to make a comment, you go to participants and then use the raise hand function. And then if you are by phone, please push *9 and I will unmute you. I will recognize you until Claudette joins us, and then I will alert her that you would like to speak. Okay, so the first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Anybody would like to make any additions, deletions, or reordering of the agenda at this time?
Roger?
Yes, go ahead, Herb, and Mary also had her hand up.
Oh, go ahead, Mary, sorry.
I was going to suggest before the motion sheet came in today that we move number 11 up in the meeting, because I know that Herb has to leave at 9. But I also noticed on the motion sheet, there's a motion to table the tech update, number 11 tech upgrade report, just to table that until budget time. And I think that's a very sensible thing to do, because I want to have plenty of time to talk about it.
Okay, does anyone else, I have a suggestion, but does anyone else have a comment on that point, on Mary's amendment?
That's all I was going to mention under mine, so yeah.
Okay, great. So maybe we can move maybe 11 up or sort of reincorporate that into the town manager's report a little bit, just so you could update us on a high level as appropriate, and then it makes sense that we should otherwise then table a substantial discussion. Does that make sense? So we're essentially striking number 11, but agreeing that there's parts of it that would make sense as a town manager's update.
That would be acceptable to me.
Okay, great. Any other additions or deletions or amendments to the agenda? John, I just want to be clear that you can hear us, because Zoom was telling me that you couldn't before.
Yep, I can hear you fine.
Great. Okay. Then if that's it, then the next item is public comment. Does any member of the public have a comment for anything that is not on the agenda? Wow. Okay. I'm seeing no public comment for things that are not on the agenda. Okay. So then we'll just move on to the approval of the consent agenda, and this will require a motion. So who would like to make that motion?
I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second, Mary, or do you have your hand up?
I will approve it, but I want to pull something from it.
Okay, what would you like to pull?
I'd like to pull the minutes
Okay,
because I want to talk about Claudette's amendment.
okay. Does
One of
any,
her amendments.
okay, right. So in other words, Claudette wrote an email to Miranda, making her
Suggested edits.
suggestion changes in
Yeah.
advance of the meeting, which was included in the packet, and you want to pull both the minutes and that email correspondence.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, anybody else?
So just a question. Mary, did you second that?
I did, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Miranda.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can pull that. So go ahead, Mary. Do you want to talk about why you're pulling that, or what you want to bring to our attention?
It's just under number 7. It says Claudette's deletion is, at budget time, Select Board will discuss possible formation of an emergency fund. Select Board members agreed to as the TM to draft revised language for the policy. Change to Select Board members will revisit undesignated fund balance during budget discussions and determine how and if the excess, if there is one, will be allocated. So I agree with her second, what she wants to change it to, but I would rather just add that on and not delete the first part, because I am interested in discussing the possible formation of an emergency fund.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask you to restate it a little bit, because now Claudette has just joined us, and so she can respond directly to this. Claudette, we're discussing, we pulled the minutes and your suggestions to the minutes regarding the emergency fund, and so Mary just wanted to ask a question to clarify. So maybe Mary's going to re-ask her question, and now that you're here, you could answer it and then also take over chairmanship of this meeting with appreciation.
Why, Roger?
Do you agree to that order of doing things, Claudette?
Well,
You
one,
just
I
jumped in.
caught the tail end of your comment, and I did not think that we had come to consensus or agreement on that emergency fund as one use of the as a possibility for excess undesignated fund balance. I know we talked about it. I know that is one thing that Herb has talked about, but I did not think that we had come to an agreement that we would specifically look at that.
Okay, I would just like that to be considered as a future agenda item.
Sure, when I think everything is open when we get to the budget, and if we have an undesignated fund balance excess, what to do with it.
Okay, and I also think when we revisit it, we should think about semantics. It has to do with the the model policy that was in the packet tonight, talking about a reserve fund, talking about undesignated fund. We should try to sort out what we're really talking about. But I just wanted to leave the door open to have that be a future agenda item.
So, Mary,
Well,
can you just repeat the phrasing that you would like to see then, and so see if Claudette would agree with that?
Well, Claudette wanted to delete, at budget time, Select Board will discuss possible formation of an emergency fund.
Oh, it's a possible formation? Maybe
Yeah.
I misread the minutes.
So if we could leave that part in,
That's fine.
that sort of leaves the door open for that. So,
That's fine with me.
okay. And the second part of what you wanted to delete was Select Board members agreed to, as the TM, to draft revised language for the policy. I think we did agree to think about revising the policy just in terms of not buying down the tax rate. But that part was clearly expressed before this statement.
Yeah.
That makes any sense. That part's still in there.
Yes.
And that's what we're considering tonight. But yeah, if we leave the first sentence in, which was, again, at budget time, Select Board will discuss possible formation of an emergency fund. That would make me happy, just to leave that door open.
Fine with me.
Okay.
So since you pulled that item, we need to now vote to accept it and as changed.
Okay, let's see.
First, you've got to vote on the other consent agenda, don't you? Because you've got to, sorry.
Oh, vote on what we didn't pull.
You've got your motion to accept the consent
Correct.
agenda seconded and, okay.
We never voted. I never called for a vote on it.
And Claudette might not realize that.
I did not realize that, and since,
Sorry.
yeah, that's okay.
So I
So
withdraw the motion as originally presented.
Well, yes. Roger, it seems to me you guys accepted the consent agenda, but pulled the minutes. So, and
That's right.
you had a second on the,
And we never voted. We did a first and a second. We never voted because rookie mistake.
okay. So now we will vote on the consent agenda, excluding the minutes.
Yep.
Yes.
Roger, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mary?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Oh, John?
Yes.
And I'm not sure I can vote because I wasn't here when you had that discussion, so I will abstain from that.
Cool.
And now is there a motion to accept the minutes as amended tonight?
I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
I don't know who got that second first, but whoever, okay, moved by Mary, seconded by John. Any further discussion? We'll go to a vote. Roger?
Yes.
Mary?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
And Claudette's a yes.
Whew, smooth. That was great. Awesome. I'm glad you're back.
The next item on the agenda is appointments to outstanding open positions. And we have one applicant for Finance Committee. Is there a motion? Is anyone willing to make a motion to appoint Linda Cook to the Finance Committee? I'm not sure. I got an email from Omer. I believe the term is a 2-year term and not a 3. Or maybe it's just the remainder of the Finance Committee that's a 2.
Omar is raising his hand. Claudette.
Omer, please clarify. Thank you. I didn't have time to catch up.
No worries. So when we met, the charge, this Omer Tryman, 236 Main Street, chair of the Finance Committee. When we first met, the charge asked the Finance Committee to set time. We had 5 members who were appointed plus the treasurer. And we decided to split those 5 into 2 seats that were 3-year terms and 3 seats that were 2-year terms. So all of the 2-year terms expired a couple of weeks ago. We did not get a term for what is effectively the open 7th seat because we didn't have 7 members in total. And so the open seats that have terms are all 2-year terms, and there's an open seat that does not have a term set. If that clarifies and doesn't further confuse.
It clarifies for me. So this is either for the 2-year term. Oh, sorry, I get really paranoid with thunderstorms. So this is either a 2-year term or an undesignated or a term that's yet to be determined.
But yeah, those are the seats that are open.
So board, how do you want to address it as a 2-year term? Mary?
If there's an undetermined term, is it likely to be more than 3 years long?
I don't,
In which case it would be a 3-year term.
I don't have the charge of the finance committee in front of me, but I don't believe it can be any longer than 3.
So if it's undetermined, it can't be more than 3. I don't know. I would think 2 might be the most reasonable way.
I think last time when we originally did these, we just said for a term to be determined by the finance committee.
Right.
That
Right.
works.
And then everyone just sort of decided amongst themselves at the finance committee meeting.
That works for me.
We just want a little bit of stagger, right? So that you don't have a whole slate of new people coming in all at once.
So
I just pulled it up so we can clarify and don't have to go back and make any changes. So the charge actually specifically says 3-year terms. The initial appointments are 1, 2, or 3 in order to stagger them. So the charge does say that all terms are 3 years.
Right.
So all new terms are 3 years. The initial
After
one.
the initial stagger. That makes sense, actually.
okay. So
Some smart guy must have wrote that.
thank you, Omer. So now, is there a motion to appoint Linda Cook to the Finance Committee for a 3-year term to expire in June 30th, 2023?
I so
I
moved.
so move. Or Mary so moves. I'll second.
All right.
And at this point, I would like to ask Linda Cook if she wants to speak to her appointment or to her application.
Well, hi, everybody, tonight. Thank you very much. I think I have some background as far as working with a number of select board budgets over the years with different town managers, so I understand process going forward there. And I also had the experience of working with the select board to develop the fund balance reserve policy, the capital budget policy, the debt management policy, the designated and special purpose funds policy, as well as helping to develop the capital budget plan and report, the last one that was created in 2011, November 11th, 2006 in doing that. So hopefully I can bring a little bit of historic knowledge moving forward, and the committee can move forward to help assist the select board with their priorities. I do have one thing to correct on my application is the email. It looks like there's a little 1 in front of the Cook. That shouldn't be there. The email is COOK, little l, all lowercase, number 1574@gmail.com.
Okay. Thank you, Linda.
You're welcome.
Any select board questions?
I just wanted to, Linda, kind of point something out. Like in your comments, you mentioned that your time in the select board would be helpful and bring historical knowledge. And of course, going through a budgeting process, is absolutely experienced. But then you go on to say this will help the finance committee focus on select board priorities. And I just would want to point out that the charge of the finance committee would be to advise the current board as they determine these priorities and not necessarily past or historical priorities. So I did want to point that out.
No, that's good for pointing it, because that was not what I was trying to imply, that it would be the past, because
Yeah.
I think you stated several projects going forward.
Yeah, that's great. And I suspected that, but I'm glad that we've clarified.
Well, thank you.
And I know, Cheryl, do you have any comments? We're supposed to be, I may have to jump up and go close some windows real quick. So if you see me just kind of really jump up. If you see me disconnect completely, Roger, it's going to be up to you. Linda, so Cheryl, you had pointed out in the past that the charge also calls for in consultation with the treasurer.
That's correct.
Related to the appointments. And so any thoughts, comments, questions?
I think Linda would make a great add to the Finance Committee. That's my
Okay,
comment.
awesome. Anything more from select board members? If not, we'll go to a vote. Roger,
Yes.
Mary,
Yes.
Rob,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
and Claudette's a yes. So thank you very much, Linda.
Well, thank all of you too.
And the next item on the agenda is the special town meeting that's set for August 11th. I thought Bonnie was going to join us, but she's not here. I do know BCA had, Cheryl, I don't know if, Mary, you were at BCA.
Yes, I
I
was.
unfortunately couldn't get there. And I know that the location has changed, but I don't know if the process has changed at all. And with Bonnie not here, she may not have the answer, so
Is that something that Herb can speak to, though?
I don't know.
I
Okay.
could tell you what I heard at the meeting if you want.
That'd be great, Mary.
Just that I think there are about 450 or so absentee ballots so far, but still a significant number of people who haven't requested them. So there does need to be a way for in-person voting. So the plan is to use the transfer station, as was mentioned before, and to have the poll workers with PPE and checklist and handing out ballots, different people doing each thing, and then a secure box to put the ballots in. And after the voting, and traffic control in case the traffic backs out onto Turnpike Road. And that after the voting is over, the ballot boxes would be taken back to Tracy Hall to be tabulated. So that is my understanding of what would happen. I know it says on the warrant that people are encouraged to get absentee ballots because it wasn't sure whether in-person voting could happen or drive-through voting. And one of the concerns of the BCA was just sort of advertising and education, that people know that it's not taking place at Tracy Hall, put up signs, put up the sandwich board, have a lot of repetitive announcements that say what the new plan is and how it's going to work. So that's sort of the gist of it right there.
Okay. All right.
So I have some questions. I don't know if, I have some questions.
Hopefully someone can answer them.
Okay. So I think one, so obviously the informational meeting has been moved, is August 10th. It's moved to electronic format. But for instance, our Zoom account can only allow for 100 people. And while we have less than 100 people who usually come out for town meeting, I want to know, so what are the plans for that, right? So I think, see Herb's on the phone right now, but I guess I have a lot of administrative questions, about how that might be going, how is the meeting going to be presented for folks on that platform? How are we moderating that space? How are we reaching out to our community to let them know that it's an online platform and making accommodations to the extent possible for folks who don't necessarily know that platform well? So I have I think I think Bonnie and Herb must have discussed some of this, and I just want to know more.
Bonnie will be on in a couple minutes. I just talked to her. She was expecting that you wouldn't be rapidly going through the agenda tonight.
I know.
So she'll hop on in a second.
Go ahead, Mary.
Just that we did not discuss the, the August 10th meeting at all.
Right. And
But all of Roger's concerns, of course, we should deal with. And maybe Bonnie's had a chance to think about them, so we should too.
The August 10th meeting is not Bonnie's responsibility. That's our responsibility.
Okay, we better get organized.
And it is on the agenda to discuss what are we gonna, how, so a lot of Roger's questions, I have the same. So I think Bonnie is on the line.
Hi, I'm sorry you guys jumped ahead of your agenda.
We're surprisingly efficient, that's all.
Perfect. So did Mary give you any of the gist of what we decided at the BCA the other night?
Yes, she did. Well, yes, she said your location has changed to transfer station. Yeah, I have to step aside for a second. Continue it out.
So can you give us just a high level update, Bonnie, on sort of what was discussed at that meeting and what you know? Obviously,
Sure.
Change. What will the experience look like for our community, and then what protections are you putting in place, obviously, and then anything else we might need to know?
Okay, am I unmuted?
No, you're good.
Okay. So after watching several clerks in the area do drive-through voting from March through Day, it has seemed to work out very, very efficiently. What has been happening is that one person will carry the full checklist. They'll go to a car, people will check in, and then they'll move forward. They'll receive the ballots they're voting. They'll take a moment, vote their ballots, and then step forward again, and they will deposit their or drive forward again. They'll deposit their ballots in the ballot boxes. Clearly, one for the primary, one for the 2 ballots people choose not to vote, and then one for the Article 8 voting. The Secretary's office, I believe, is going to be coming out with a directive that will allow clerks to start being able to process absentee ballots 30 days prior to an election, which means that after we get an absentee ballot back from the voter, we'll check it back in, verify everything is is correct, and we may just go ahead and feed them through the machine at that point. I would be asking the BCA for 2 BCA members to join us while we do that. So it may be twice a week we feed through ballots, and then on election night, when voting is closed, we'll transport the ballots from the transfer station to Tracy Hall, where we will proceed feeding the primary ballots through the tabulator and start counting on the Article 8 reconsideration vote at the same time. The safety measures are that we don't have to worry about people gathering too close together. There doesn't need to be a 6-foot distance between each voter. We won't have to go in and disinfect right after somebody is voted. The only thing that we will have to wipe down when they're done is the clipboard that they'll be voting on. And I'm hoping to purchase golf pencils that they could either keep, or we can put them in a box and re-sterilize them for use down the road. So also what I discovered yesterday, after getting almost a 4-inch pile of postcards back from the Secretary's mailing, that mailing only had people requesting ballots for the primary and the November election. And at this point, we are just going to go ahead and with everybody that has requested a primary ballot, be issued the opportunity to vote for the reconsideration article. So that's where we are. It's at this point, I think the easiest part of the whole process will actually be orchestrating the drive-through voting. We have an area for which people who have neglected to register to vote will be able to do their same-day registration. There may be times during the day where we may need assistance with traffic control, and I was going to reach out to the PD and the fire department to see the possibility of during our busiest times to have a little help with traffic control. So I've put about 3 months worth of thought into this, along with Judy, as what is the safest distancing, less contact way to safely perform an election.
Okay. So Claudette, Chief Frank has her hand up, and then Rob also does, Rob Gear.
Go ahead, Chief.
Chief Frank, Norwich Police Department. We would be happy to help and assist with traffic. I just wanted to check and see if some decisions have been considered regarding alternate locations, such as maybe Dresden Fields. I do have a little concern with the amount of traffic at the transfer station that would get backed up on New Boston, that it might create a safety issue. So I just wanted us to think about that there might be some other locations which allow for a better facility to prevent some backup and potentially some safety concerns.
The reason that we looked at the transfer station is because it is a one-directional flow of traffic, essentially, and we wouldn't have to worry about people holding up other people, jumping out of line, coming in the wrong way. We had honestly talked about the possibility of the public safety parking lot, but I immediately ruled that out for fear of a fire emergency or a police emergency. So that one, as ideal as it would be, is simply not going to function well for any of us. And the hope is that we really encourage absentee voting so that at the end of the day, you know, the possibility of having a large amount of drive-through voting is substantially decreased. We are trying to do everything to make this work well, have it be safe, and to hope that the voters take into consideration, you know, everything we're trying to do to make it easier for them to vote from their kitchen table or easy chair, to please take that opportunity and alleviate some of the traffic.
Yep, the police department will be there to support you wherever it is. Maybe we can just touch base this week to firm up some details for traffic planning.
Absolutely, Jen. Thank you so much. Rob, you had a question?
When do the ballots go out?
As soon as I can physically get them out, Rob. I'm hoping to start sending them out tomorrow, Friday at the latest. But, you know, right now, Judy and I are chasing our tails. The postcards are coming in so quick we can't even get them logged in the computer. Once they're logged in, they're going to go out the door as fast as I physically can get them out.
Thank you.
Roger?
So just a question. So maybe like a couple weeks ago, at least, I requested my ballot through the Secretary of State's office. And I haven't received it. So two questions. Like one, if people already requested their ballot online, are you still Like, is there a chance that you're still working through that? And then 2, should I fill out the postcard just in case?
The first question is if they've already requested a ballot. We're trying to work through this, and we're trying to get them out the door. And your second question, if you are absolutely certain that you had applied for your ballot request online, do not fill out the postcard. Use it as a bookmark, please. It's just going to take double entry on our half. And the ballots did not go out because the Secretary of State's office was very late in getting their ballot envelopes and ballot material to us, which is another thing that held up the works. So some of this is controllable and some of this is not within my control.
Of course. All right. Well, thank you.
Any other questions for Bonnie from the board?
Yes, for me there is.
Oh, what is it, Bonnie?
Would you please, at your meetings, your future meetings, make some sort of a public statement reminding people that the polling place has changed to 24 New Boston Road, the Norwich transfer station, so that we can get the word out fast, furious, and repetitive.
Okay, I think we only have one meeting prior to, but we will do what we can.
That would be much appreciated.
Any other board questions for Bonnie? Thank you, Bonnie. Now we'll
Anybody on the board want to come in and help us stuff ballots and get them in the mail?
I would be happy to, Bonnie. I'm available tomorrow afternoon and Friday afternoon.
Put on a mask. We'll look forward to you tomorrow afternoon, Claudette.
Okay, I'll be there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll
Thank
email.
you.
I'll email you, Bonnie. I appreciate that challenge. Yeah.
It's not a challenge. It's a serious request for help, Roger.
Yeah, I hear that. But you to get in the trenches, right? So yeah.
That's right. See what the other side is like. Okay.
Okay, Bonnie, thank you.
Thank you. You sure you don't need me for anything else?
I don't think so. I think the rest of it's going to be the August 10th information session. We need to clarify some stuff there.
And will you also run that by me as well, only because John Carroll will need to be notified? He is our elected moderator.
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Linda has her hand up, Claudette.
Go ahead, Linda.
One thought might be that helped greatly with the town plan was putting large posters out around and having them out early for people to see. I don't know if the select board would like to do something like that. John Pepper was the one that orchestrated it for us.
Yep. I'm not going to step on Bonnie's toes.
Yeah.
So, my understanding from Mary is that sounds like they had a plan for posters and sandwich boards and stuff.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Herb, I'm not sure if you heard some of Roger's questions related to the August 10th information session.
I didn't hear them, but basically speaking, the item that you're going to be talking about is the reconsideration of the Tracy Hall vote. It's your meeting. It's a public info meeting. I assume it'll be a Zoom meeting like you're having now. And basically, it's not your job to present a support or not. It's basically just making sure if people have questions on the article language, it's just kind of clarifying that. If they need to understand generally what it's about, you can tell them what the project is about and how it came about, very similar to what you did at town meeting. And that's all you have to deal with. It's not a thing to
Right,
recommend.
right. Yeah, but Roger's questions had more to do with
So,
the Zoom attendance. We're limited at 100 with our current account. How can we accommodate more than 100, even though we are not sure that we'll have more than 100?
I think I can speak off list with Herb on this, like, because I think it's like, you know, I don't want to spend. I mean, I don't think we have to spend too much time working through that. I think for me, I guess, like if we think that it's solely an online event, right? So this is a Zoom meeting that's just potentially larger, and that we have a version of the presentation from last time and reach out to, and obviously ensure that some folks who are really deeply conversant in this from the ad hoc committee are there to answer some technical questions. I think outside of that, then I think we're fine. But if we imagine that we wanted to do some kind of like hybrid thing, like if we wanted to have like public places for people to have access to it, particularly for folks who don't have broadband access, I want to know that requires obviously town support and town departments. And I just wanted to know what that looked like, if that's what we wanted to do. But if this is exclusively an online thing, so to speak, like I'm happy to be available to like do what we normally do with the Zoom, and like obviously have a version, it's on my desktop, take those slides, right, and like run through it. But if we wanted to do anything different than that, I wanted Herb's input. So not to undercut my own point or to interrupt you, but I guess I did both, so apologies.
I have no problem, you know, we can talk offline early next week sort of thing to figure that out. It might be just simply upgrading the account that we have to one of the, you know, to one of the bigger ones. I mean, we just understand that any of the Zoom stuff payments right now are not part of the budget. I'll be recommending that for the budget in the future for a higher level so that we can have more than one host, meaning we can have other meetings going on at the same time frame, but it does get pretty expensive pretty quick. So, but that would be the big thing. That would be the one way to look at it. And then other than that, we can chat about the logistics.
Yeah, and then what about, sorry, Mary has her hand up, but like, and I guess the suggestion I guess is for this group, like, do you want to do anything differently than that online meeting, and obviously promoting it, and then like working with Herb to figure out, if necessary, the administrative stuff?
The Energy Committee has been doing the kind of, they've either had one meeting already or they're planning on having one or two meetings leading up to that, with just like they did before, which is basically just trying to kind of offer additional opportunity for voters to be informed in terms of what the project's about.
Mary, you had a question?
yeah, I mean, it has to do partly with the reconsideration vote. Should we ask Energy Commission or committee people to be there to answer technical questions is one thing, if people have questions about it. And the other is, isn't another purpose of the election is just to elect people to unexpired terms. So should we have, and it might just be the listers, but should we have an opportunity for the candidate to speak?
There are three positions to fill: cemetery, trustee of public funds, and lister. The moderator would take any questions with regard to public officials and those particular things. I assume that John Carroll, the moderator, would turn the meeting over to you folks as it pertains to the reconsideration. So in other words, you don't, as a board, you don't have to deal with the three positions that are up for election.
Right, I just wanted to make sure that that content was on the agenda. And I assume it doesn't have anything, you know, like all the state positions and so forth is not part of this meeting. The local piece is what this meeting is about. Reconsideration on these terms, these positions that need to be filled.
Yeah, the officers, when you have this, the Article 1 is the elect town officers, which are the 3 vacant positions. And then it'll be Article 2, just like a regular town meeting, and Article 2 will be the reconsideration. Article 3 is anything else that can come before the legally come before the meeting, other business.
That's great. Thanks.
Yeah.
I don't think any, so maybe I have to rephrase this because maybe I'm like convoluting my question, which is something I tend to do. But do we want any other option for people to participate in town meeting for this special town meeting? Is my question.
So,
are there walkthroughs for this or no? Go ahead.
So Chief Frank just mentioned that there's an option for Zoom to do a one-time ad of a large meeting option, which can boost it up to 500 seats. So we could look into doing that, and we're certainly not.
I'm personally not a fan of holding any in-person or a hybrid type of deal. It's either, to me, it's all Zoom, or we do something like Hanover did with their town meeting, which I think is, we just do no.
Hanover spent $10,000 yesterday to do what they did.
Right. So,
Yeah.
so I'm an all Zoomer.
Yeah, and then ultimately for like what was I think 146 people who turned out, but I think obviously they felt committed. I don't know. I'm not in Hanover, but maybe I wonder if they felt committed to that equity piece. So so it's a question that can remain rhetorical, and I don't disagree that at this point, logistically speaking, anything more than bumping up the Zoom is probably beyond our abilities, unfortunately. So, okay.
But we do need to come to some kind of agreement on, do we want, I'm looking at this as a very minimalist approach. We present the article and have people available to answer the questions from the floor, from the Energy Committee, but I do not want to have presentations. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean, if you recall, this part of the town meeting was very brief. So, the town meeting was long because we had everything in it for a normal town meeting. This is just going to cover this one issue. I don't know. I mean, a short. I think if you do presentations, then yeah, you've got to open it up to everything. So I'd probably agree with that.
Any other thoughts?
There was, Madam Chair, I think there was a handout or a PowerPoint or something that was done at some point that could be just included as part of a packet when, because there still has to be kind of a little bit of an agenda put. I mean, the notice serves from that standpoint, but if you wanted to have a little packet that was available out there for people just to have information, which would mimic what may have been available back for town meeting, that would be the only thing I would say could be some stuff. And then that would give people ammunition or whatever to ask questions at the thing without having an actual presentation as part of the public info meeting. Or something up on the webpage or whatever it is, so people are directed. That's all.
I think that would be okay. It would be minimal.
Webpage or part of the packet?
See, oh, well, why not both?
Anybody else have thoughts?
Both.
Okay, so I'll just, I want to ponder that. We still have a couple weeks. My hesitation is because if we're going to, in all fairness, should we not include something from people who have opposing views?
I'm just talking about the factual stuff that was available out there. That I can't remember. I have to go back and look, but you know, this could be just sort of part of your agenda discussion at the next meeting. So I could look for that and see if there really was something, because I thought that there was some level of just normal information put up on the web page along those lines that just talked about what it was. I think it was a little bit of the cost breakdown for the project, and some other stuff. And again, it was just sort of factual. It wasn't a supporting thing.
Okay. All right. I remember you brought back a memory. It seems so long ago. Okay.
In mine, it was 3 slides, and then Aaron did a presentation of 4 slides.
Go ahead, Mary.
Well, I think if it is a meeting, I mean, people will, there will be people who have questions, although this has been out there for several months. But also, I think people probably do want to share their perspective. And the world was really a different place back in town meeting day. So, people have had a chance to really think about it. So I wouldn't want to squelch anybody just saying how they felt about it.
No, I'm not suggesting that at all.
Good.
So, okay.
So last time, Claudette, just for history, and then, so last time what happened is I coordinated with the moderator and said, here's my slides. The Energy Committee has requested time to also present at some of the factual information on this article. And we sought permission from the moderator for that. And so that was what happened last time. And I think this time it sounds like we don't necessarily do that.
Follow the same format, probably.
Yeah. So it's a different moderator, but ultimately they run the show, and they'll turn to us, and so I'm happy to.
Sounds good.
Send the docs.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Langus, either John Langus dropped off. So we've got a place to start. I will connect with Bonnie about John Carroll. And I'll do a couple of postings on the listserv about the special meeting and the revote specifically. And John's back. And then hopefully have something for you to look at for the July 20th, whatever our next meeting is, in terms of packet info for that meeting. Work for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So moving on to the next item, Regional Energy Coordinator update. And Mr. Langus, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Glad I was able to get back. So yeah, in the packet, we've got a draft proposed final agreement between the towns and the TRORC for this position. I also included a bit of email correspondence. So the only sort of commentary I would add is that, so there was a meeting of the steering committee. I think that was like right after I got appointed. I wasn't aware of it. And so, although we did have someone there, we had at least Rob and maybe one other person. Sorry, not Rob, Rod. We were told at that meeting by TRORC that the steering committee would have a role in picking which resumes were selected for interviews, and then would have some sort of role in exploring these candidates. Having said that, then the TRORC did none of that. They didn't consult anyone. They picked a group of resumes that they wanted. They interviewed them, and they've decided who they want to hire. So, you know, it's exactly what the people that were reluctant about this position were concerned about. TRORC has a history of not being accountable, not being respectful of the small town democracies to which they are, you know, supposed to be, on whose behalf they're supposed to be acting. So, you know, I find that pretty disappointing. I probably don't go so far as to suggest that we shouldn't sign this, only because it was approved by a vote quite by a fairly large margin. It's a 1-year agreement. It will only be extended if all the towns agree to it. But I thought that was worth raising because I know that I'm not the only one that had that concern about the TRORC when we had the initial discussions about this, and thought it warranted a little bit of discussion here. And so, yeah, I'll leave it open to anyone else who wants to comment there.
Mary?
Just in looking over the agreement, I was noticing that the initial approach seems to be that all the towns would have an energy audit. And I'm thinking that perhaps a significant amount of work was done in consideration of this the geothermal project, but not knowing whether any of that data would be available to this committee, or would we just be sort of, you know, doing energy audit things again? You know, it just seemed redundant. And also, I also would like to know, and I know this is an experiment to see how this works out, but I'm just wondering what value we're going to be getting out of it. And I don't know whether it's possible to steer a little bit. I mean, you can't know what you have to fix if you don't know what, you know, what your energy efficiencies are and so forth. But I thought a lot of that work had been done by, you know, the firm that was going to do the geothermal. So, although I didn't evaluate the fleet and so forth. But I think on the buildings, I think a significant amount of scrutiny was put in.
And I believe that the Energy Committee now has it was in their minutes of their last meeting. They've gotten I don't want to misspeak.
Yeah, Eva, they have a volunteer who's looking at greenhouse gases used for amongst town stuff.
Correct. A full inventory. Yeah. Yeah, and just to respond, Mary, I think the idea on the audit is to recognize that different towns are in different places. And so I don't think that, you know, we would redo anything for Norwich if we felt like we had a good handle on that, which I think would be the case. We can spend our efforts, you know, on other stuff. So it's certainly intended to be.
John, we're losing you.
I think Rob has his hand up, Claudette, in the interim.
Go ahead, Rob.
The study that was it Eva, Roger, yeah, did for the Energy Committee was completely unrelated to the geothermal project. It was more an audit in general over greenhouse gas emissions.
Right, for the town though, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
At large. So the thing that would be valuable, the only thing that would be really valuable about a second audit would be that it would be looking at it from different eyes, maybe with different standards, and the standards would be consistent across all the towns participating.
So Herb has his hand up, Claudette.
Go ahead, Herb.
From my perspective, I think we've pretty much been audited to death on energy, whether it be, you know, 15 years ago or what have you. I think we're a community, especially with the zealousness of our Energy Committee, we're in the mode of implementation. more than trying to figure out what we need to do. Obviously, audits are important to update once in a while as technology changes or improvements in electrical type stuff. But I would, and this was part of my and Linda Gray's concern when we started talking about this, was that, you know, this really is not going to benefit Norwich if it's just going to be kind of a little bit of an audit in each community and then you know, replace LED lights. That we need to be a step further than that. So that is a little bit of a concern that's out there. I do understand it's important to get a baseline of stuff, so whomever is in there, if there are, you know, joint things, intermunicipal things that we can deal with, great. But also having a regional perspective is important for everybody as a whole, even if we may be, along with Woodstock, light years ahead of some other communities. I do hope it is successful, but hearing what John Lang has said about the nature of this, I think we better be very careful about this and what path we're headed down with regard to the Regional Planning Commission. I was pleasantly surprised to see that the steering committee sort of gives Norwich and Woodstock, the larger entities that are shelling out the most cash, kind of the most effort, instead of having like equal time by that person divided up among the communities. It really looks like they divided the time up based on the amount, the value of the money of each community going in, which is probably pretty good at this point from the standpoint because of the way that Two Rivers did stuff. But hopefully that way we get more of the bang for the buck that we got. But I hope that we don't get into the situation where it's just going to be another energy audit for Norwich, and then we're done with our number of hours.
Yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead, Roger.
Roger, then Mary.
So I think like, just to focus in on the agreement, like I would not sign this agreement as is. I mean, I agree. There's no reason why I'm not saying that we shouldn't necessarily fund this. I agree with John. I'm not interested in going against the authorization of a large percentage of our community who sees value in this position. But, you know, I think this contract or this agreement like could benefit from us asking some questions. And I think these questions should be informed by Rod and Linda, who previously represented us at these meetings, right? So, and I think, you know, I reached out to Linda, but I know she had another commitment and was going to try to make this meeting. So I do, and I know that Herb has also talked to them, but I think, you know, at the basis, like Herb mentioned, like, yes, they give us deference in the number of hours in recognition that we're shelling out most of the cash. But, you know, how does the number of hours, how does it divide up into a work week or a work day? And like, how does anyone, like, that's not how work works, right? Like, and that's particularly not how work works when you're like focused on a project. And so like the only way that the number of hours are going to be achieved in any like equal way is if the project is singular. And that project sounds like it's a form of an audit, which I think we've all established is not really valuable to our community. So I think they need to understand, like, so much of this was getting folks, the region, on the same page with energy. And quite frankly, we're not on the same page with energy. And so they need to bake that into their understanding at the forefront. So I think like these are all concerns right now. These are not questions, but I think this agreement could benefit from like us figuring out some questions and dialogue with Rod, Herb, and Linda a little bit to just, you know, push back in a thoughtful way. I think because I think, you know, seeing these track changes, first of all, who are these people who made these track changes on that agreement? I don't know them. And second, like, they're not of the steering committee. So I think they need to qualify the role of the steering committee. And then I think they also need to, like, you know, address things like non-binding. Like, I'm not interested in like a performative participation in this project that's supposed to be grassroots, right? So, you know, we're not giving our taxpayer dollars to a feather in this commission's cap, right? So we should now I'm off my little box, and I think we should just we should figure out some questions. I'm happy to send them to whoever we appoint to field it if that's something we think we should do.
Mary?
I'm wondering if on energy in general, especially if we're talking about municipal buildings, and if we're talking about having zero carbon emissions, it's very expensive to reconfigure the buildings so that they actually save the energy. So I'm wondering whether we also need to be thinking of something along the line of just carbon credits or offsetting, what we have. And I don't know how, I don't know how anybody feels about that, but if we're actually trying to reduce our carbon footprint, maybe it's more cost effective to do it that way rather than trying to deal with our buildings and get them down to zero.
I want to wait until John gets back.
Okay.
Rob has his hand up.
There's been a lot of discussion about the value of carbon offsets and how many of them are just to make you feel good. They don't do anything. They don't really accomplish anything that isn't already happening. So it's, I'm very much opposed to just latching your hopes on carbon offsets.
Okay, thanks.
And I had a question that I don't know if, I'm kind of along the lines of Roger. Plus I also, did anybody else add up the hours?
I did.
$17.99.
In a 2080, assuming no one goes on vacation, right?
And last time I knew, an FTE was 2,000 hours. So what happened to those other 200 hours? Is my question.
Doesn't sound like a good contract.
The other aspect about the auditing of it and the accounting of it would be, do they do one 4-hour task and then apply 4 hours to separately to all the different towns?
Right.
Yeah.
But meanwhile.
Oh, here's Linda. I don't know if that will add to our discussion.
And is John Langus maybe the 4415?
Yes, that's me.
Okay. So John, one of the questions that I had, I asked if anybody else had added up the hours, and they come up to $17.99. Full-time FTE is 2,000 hours. So not sure what happens with the other.
The rest is aggrandizing the TRORC, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, so I'll kind of another one of my concerns with Roger that I'm not comfortable signing an agreement with this contract right now. But so did anybody have questions specific for Linda? Gray? Mary?
Well, just that I had mentioned the carbon offsets, and Rob was very much against them. Do you see any? I'm just wondering if we're just turning over all the rocks in our efforts to make the town be responsible as far as reducing our carbon footprint. So I think like carbon offsets or, investing in solar or something like that, instead of trying to deal with our municipal buildings, which is very expensive to get them up to speed.
So before Linda answers that, Mary, how does that have to do with the contract that's up for us to sign for the Regional Energy Committee?
Okay, I think what it has to do with it is that the only defined work is the energy audit. And then there's hours, and as you say, they don't even add up. But what is the value in this for Norwich? What specific work can they do for us, and what direction would we want that work to take? So that's all.
And
Okay.
my proposal was we ask a form of that question and submit it to some person, a point person, which may be Linda or Rod or John, and then ask these questions of whoever is facilitating this contract. That would be my process point.
Sure.
And John is our rep, so I would think it would go through him. So my other concern with this contract as it went out was that there was only a 1-day turnaround for the members of that steering committee to comment on the contract. Even less than that, I believe, which to me is like
nothing.
You've got to be kidding.
Yeah.
So, so Linda, I think you were at that steering committee meeting, Linda Gray?
Yes, I was. And my apologies, I got onto this meeting late because I was trying to monitor a different Zoom meeting. And so I am no longer involved with this because the planning group has dissolved, and now you're right, it's in the steering committee arena. And so but I did look up like the last version that the planning group looked at with regard to the governance section. The language in the contract you're looking at now has gotten really, really more legalistic. So the one that our planning group looked at said the IREC will be a Two Rivers employee managed on a day-to-day basis by the Two Rivers Executive Director. Each participating town shall appoint a representative to a steering committee which may provide input into the coordinator's work activities subject to budget limits and be the venue for overall direction of tasks. Representatives are responsible for keeping their respective select board apprised, and each town will have an equal vote. So that is just quite different from the language that the contract in that section says now. So it has a lot of stuff about very legalistic sounding stuff about how the Two Rivers Executive Director has sole authority and the steering committee has non-binding input. And so I agree with what I heard Roger saying, which is I think it would be appropriate just to come up with a list of questions that you have about the contract and ask John as the rep on the steering committee to pursue getting answers before you go forward with it.
Thank you. So John Langus, do you get a fairly good sense of the questions that we want answered?
Yeah, I believe I do.
Okay. Mary?
Do we really know if we can get anything out of this, which I'm getting more and more doubtful that we can, what direction would we want it to go? Like, what are we asking of them?
Clarity on the contract, I think, ultimately. And I think particularly for the use of hours, and I think it might be worth pointing out that for communities that have a strong baseline of what is guaranteed contractually in this agreement, right, with that audit, what are our other guarantees, I would say.
But I'm not asking, do we have any idea what we are thinking to get out of this? And I'm not sure that we do. Like the energy audit thing, I think we were kind of past that. But what really do we want to get out of it? I mean, we've gone down this road with this geothermal thing, and we know we have, old buildings that are kind of patchwork together, and then they're renovated. And they're not ideal for just getting a net zero result. So if it's mostly buildings, we kind of have an idea. If it's mostly our fleet, then is there a way that we could get some value out of this by research about electric vehicles or You know, what are some things that we want to get out of this is what I'm asking. And maybe Linda has an idea.
Go ahead, Linda.
I can just share. I want to preface my comments by noting that this version of an energy coordinator is not my first choice, but I think that's possible for it to be useful for all the towns participating. And so some other ideas that the Energy Committee came up with, and this was back in April as the planning group was just trying to, you know, to provide comment and stuff to, you know, to each other and to Two Rivers. So there's, you know, ultimately, like, concepts we had was trying to like coordinate maybe bike paths across town borders, trying to, like, for in Norwich, so we lucked out and had a volunteer resident help with our greenhouse gas inventory, but there's further work that in the section of that kind of inventory called stroke 3, where, you know, where we could, you know, use some help. The other thing is, the other particular idea is that as we undertake various things to help town residents with either solar or weatherization or anything, that to have in hand from, say, the community action agencies that cover our area, to have in hand a good idea of the numbers of low-income households, you know, so that we could work on programs and campaigns, and we know who to target and stuff like that. So there are other things that I think we could get useful help from this position. So I'm not suggesting to abandon it, but I do feel a little concerned just seeing the somewhat new language in that contract.
Thank you, Linda. And could you just please provide your locatable address? Sorry.
Yes, I'm sorry. It's 175 Kerwin Hill Road.
Thank you.
Herb has his hand up, Claudette.
Herb, go ahead.
Sorry to belabor the point, but that on the first page of this agreement, the last paragraph talking about Two Rivers being the sole, basically the sole person over this, that's really wrong, and was not the way it was sold to me in a personal meeting. That has to change such that the performance evaluation, the hiring, the firing, the salary, all that's defined by the steering committee. That's the whole purpose of the steering committee. They're the entity that's hiring, firing, setting the rate, doing the performance evaluation, all that. All we're doing with Two Rivers is using them administratively to piggyback onto their employment side of stuff. I understand there needs to be a balance between the fact that Two Rivers is taking on the employment status, such as workers' comp and all that sort of thing, but that's where we pay the overhead costs related to this particular position. I know it's been stated, but this is not the way it was sold. But now, having said that, I don't want to hold this up. But in other words, I'm coming across negatively, and I don't want to raise an issue that's going to stop something, because we're already into the new fiscal year. So probably that's where your hours are disappearing every day this is not approved. And then lastly, I'm doing that as a joke, but lastly, it's 2,080 hours, not 2,000 hours that makes up. So it's actually a lot more hours, 281 hours that are lost.
Unless you take a week off for stuff.
Yeah, unless your FTE equivalent is not 40 hours a week. Yeah. So I want to wrap this up, and I'm getting a consensus from the board that we are not willing to vote to make a motion and or approve of this contract as it stands, and that we charge our representative, who's John Langus, to formulate a series of, he knows what he needs to do. Ask some questions, get some answers, share our concerns with, I can't remember the contact person from Two Rivers. Is that everybody?
Right, from
Yep.
all of them, yeah.
Everybody
no,
in
I'm good
agreement
with
with that? And it would be interesting to share all of our comments with the rest of the steering committee, because it would be.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, it'll be a reply to the group email.
Okay, then we will move on if everybody's okay with moving on. Do you want to take a break?
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, John.
I almost erased all of our ahead that we were. Sorry about that.
And John, if you don't have the document that Linda was talking about, the original draft.
I do not have that.
Linda, could you share that with John? Thank you very much. Okay. So my next question is, do we want to move on to policies or do we want to take a 10-minute break now?
Probably a break.
Yeah, let's go ahead and take the break since it's here in our agenda.
Okay. 10 minutes. Back at 8:01. I believe all select board members are here. So resuming the select board meeting for July 8th. Our next item on the agenda are policy updates. The first one is the fund balance policy. Is there anyone willing to make a motion?
Oh,
Or we can discuss first and then make a motion, but we try to make a motion first and then discuss.
okay, I'll move it. I move to hear as a first reading to amend the currently adopted fund balance reserve policy contained in the town master financial policy as follows, and to schedule a second reading with possible adoption on July 22nd, 2020.
Is there a second?
Second.
So motion is made by Mary, seconded by Rob. And now, Mary, I think you wanted to comment?
I would just that kind of briefly touch base with Herb on it and just try to include the one sentence change that says the undesignated fund will not be used to pay down the tax rate. That's the only change. I believe it's stated exactly like that.
Any select board comments? Any other comments? So my one question is, can we adopt this and not just have it as a first read? Since there are minimal changes.
It's fine with me.
Willing to amend that motion?
Okay, I will amend my motion. Let's see. To amend the currently adopted fund balance reserve policy contained in the town master financial policy. Okay, and that would be enough, right?
I would do as presented, Mary, instead of as follows. I think I missed a area that Miranda was trying to get some input from me.
Okay, I'm just going to read it again to try to get this clear. I move to amend the currently adopted fund balance reserve policy contained in the town master financial policy as presented.
Rob, are you willing to second that?
Yes.
Thank you. Any other board comments? Seeing none, we'll take a vote. Mary, how do you vote? Roger?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
And Claudette's a yes.
Okay.
Moving on to the tax collection policy. Is anyone willing to make a motion on this one? And this would be a first read.
I'll do it again. I move to hear as a first reading to amend as a strike all the currently adopted tax collection policy and procedure as presented and amended and to schedule the second reading with possible adoption on July 22nd, 2020.
Second.
Made by Mary, seconded by Rob. I'm not sure I understand what this motion is saying. Herb.
Basically, what it's saying is that the document before you in its marked up state is the first reading itself, and what it's doing is substituting in its entirety the current policy as we move forward. That's the term strike all.
Okay. So I will add a little bit of explanation, or if anybody has a question. So Herb shared with me not the complete VLCT tax collection policy, but a good chunk of it. And so I reworked. A lot of my questions had to do with timing and reporting. So I added some things that were listed in the statute as being required, which is the bi-monthly reporting and the annual report. But some of my ongoing one of my biggest question for the board is, at what point or after how much time do we move to a tax collection status?
I thought it was 15 days. Oh, no, that's just
No, I mean, sorry, excuse me, to go to tax sale.
Ah, okay.
That is not not in any of the material, the half VLCT tax collection policy that I saw. It's not been in, it wasn't in the draft that I worked off of. So I'm wondering if
that's my job as a delinquent tax collector. I make that determination. And the idea, though, is that you have to go through all this whole procedure first. And if all else fails, you can go into the tax sale process. However, there are some communities that never go into a tax sale process. They get as far as they possibly can and beg and scream and scratch, and then they just don't do it. Other communities, like I did in Fairhaven, you get to the point where you're done trying to scratch, plead, send out notices and all that, and you finally basically say it's time to go off to tax sale to collect the money that is owed the town, and stop having the other taxpayers take on the burden of this person's costs that they're not paying. So I don't mean to be, I'm just that's the way I would say is that each individual delinquent taxpayer is kind of different from another. Some people, there's legitimacy to why they haven't paid, and you get to a certain point, and then there are others that are they just don't pay, and you have to, it's kind of like you have to kind of feel it out as you go through the process, because again, you get to the point where someone's really willing to do a payment plan, and you get it going, and then all of a sudden they leave town, or there's something else pops up in their life, and it's ebb and flow. Sometimes you're in the middle. You can start a tax sale process, and then the person realizes that you're being really serious with them, and they start making some payments, or their mortgage company does, and then you back off. But you don't necessarily back it off until you get to a certain point, or that you feel that they are actually making effort toward paying off their delinquent taxes. It's an interesting process.
So in the VLCT model, are we currently sending out letters monthly with payments and to the overdue or delinquent taxpayers?
So basically, we do notices right now. We have very few delinquent taxpayers compared to most communities, and especially the community I used to work for. So this is a town that is not a major concern, but there are a number of repeat offenders that owe a significant amount of money. What we've traditionally done is we send out notices on a monthly basis with regard to the interest payments and everything that they owe, because it kicks in, and we try to set up payment arrangements with everybody. This is a process that I wanted to re-tackle with the retirement of Roberta, and I haven't been, because of the situation, haven't been able to really get into it. And then also the pandemic is here. So I do want to, the real reason why I went out and got the new handbook for delinquent tax collectors is to get back into the process that I used to deal with in Fairhaven, which is to make a stronger stand on those that are delinquent. And Becky's been doing a good job so far for a number of folks. There's definitely a couple other folks, though, that we need to step up and really get into some of the, like the appendices that you have, which have the other types of notices that are out there. But I am being sensitive to, there are individuals I'm purposely being sensitive with, because we're in a pandemic and some people are unemployed, that sort of thing. So
yeah, that doesn't cover the 5 years in arrears.
Right, that absolutely, and that's where, and Roberta had firsthand experiences, basically verbal firsthand experiences with a number of the individuals, and she could call up at certain points and say, okay, now's the time, and the person would send somebody in with a chunk of change, but it never really got any further than that. So, but with the loss of Roberta went out the door, those kind of verbal relationships that she had where she was able to keep it. But there's always been this, at least in recent past, this level that doesn't really seem to get below a certain point. And there was a whole process that I did in Fairhaven that there was movement that kept it down. Every single year you go back up again, but then you get them to pay down and you get it down. And that's the process that I want to get involved with. This town takes a very light approach traditionally to delinquent taxpayers.
Mary, you had a question or a comment?
Well, just wondering if all the different steps and notices and really trying to get people to work with you, if they don't work, that it basically would probably play out over a year at most, it sounds like, or even a few months less than that if you're going to get anywhere, is what it sounds like.
This takes years in certain instances, absolutely.
So
And
you're saying that in some instances it takes years to really clear everything out, that
Yep.
you just have to have a relationship, and sometimes you have to push a little bit, and
Yep.
sometimes you have to gather information and so forth. So
Yeah, you do. There's a bunch of notices that you have to do, and it's important to do all of the noticing requirements because especially in Vermont law, the Vermont Constitution guarantees private property rights, unlike many other constitutions in the United States. Therefore, judges in Vermont, environmental court judges, are very much lean on the side of landowners. So they take tax sales extremely seriously, and all of the notices, and that's why there's a lot of prescriptiveness in our statute, as well as in the delinquent tax collectors handbook, because of the nature of private property rights and you're when you go to a tax sale, you're kind of effectively taking it's like a takings with a person's property. So you have to have gone through some pretty rigid and strict processes and notices to get to that particular level. And essentially at any time along the way, the person can walk in with a chunk of cash and say, here you go, and you're done with the process. But the noticing can take can take a lot of time. The tax sale process takes a long time. There's a full year after a tax sale for redemption before anybody that obtains the property through tax sale. So it again, it tries to err on the side of the property owner because it's their property.
And I guess my intent in this rewrite of this policy was to make sure that what what the delinquent tax collector is required by statute to do is done. And that includes the bi-monthly reports, the annual reports, the monthly notices to the overdue and delinquent taxpayers of their updated penalties, all of that. So.
Yep. And we do have the accounting. I do get monthly reports that Becky prints out for me where there's stuff that we've been lax on, where I've been lax on is some of the stuff that would go to the board if they want it. We just did the end of year report and forwarded that off to Cheryl, which it's required to under statute. And that's the intent of that. It really is I like the fact that you're putting stuff in here. And so that because I do think we do need to go down the path. We used to do tax sales in Norwich, but I think there are a couple that we need to move toward in that process, and having this spelled out is going to be critical, especially if there is a fight that brews.
Roger?
So I think actually the comments back and forth on this policy are really instructive and helpful. I think Claudette and Herb put in the intellectual labor for us, right? So I appreciate the conversation that was happening in the comments. Is there anything, and I do think that, you both came at it from a different orientation. So has anything left outstanding? Is there any sort of disagreements that haven't been resolved in these track changes and these comments? Because otherwise I appreciate and defer to the conversation that you're having in the comments, if that makes sense.
I think there were a couple of questions that Claudette recently sent me in some email that I haven't gotten to yet, but and she asked one of right out of the chute, she asked one of them, and that was the time frame to add a notices and into tax sale.
Right.
And then I just can't remember from any other email, but I've been trying to answer her questions, stick to the stuff, and I think, I agree with you that the back and forth with the comments is helpful. It gets, every time we send one out, though, it gets a little bit more complex because there's a different color that gets involved. But I think for me, it's been helpful to know what Claudette as a policymaker wants to see. And from my standpoint, I've been trying to share, just procedurally what seems to make sense versus not. And in this particular instance, these things, there is a lot of prescriptiveness to this, so that's why it's necessarily long in some instances.
Yeah, and what I'm not sure of is I understand Herb's as the delinquent tax collector saying that he doesn't want to set a time frame for at which point we would proceed with a tax sale. And I don't remember, I don't recall what the handbook says about that, or if we as a board can write a policy that says, after 4 years, if no, whatever. Some of it is if they've entered a contract for payments and they stop paying, that part of it can lead to, if there's, so some of it is, I guess I don't.
Can I interrupt for a second? Because I think I might have, I think I know where you're headed. It may be taking it away from going from notices to tax sale, but really somewhere in your policy aspect of things, you would say for any individual for a particular year of delinquency, that delinquency should not be on the books any longer than X. So whether that's 2 years, 1 year, 2.5 years, something like that, or shouldn't be on the books for longer than a year or a year and a half. And at that point, that would be, a recommendation that the delinquent tax collector move toward tax sale or other method.
So, and Roger, to answer some of your questions, we got kind of a little bit, because I wanted to get this information into the packet. We haven't really completed our discussion about some of
Okay,
this.
cool.
So,
Yeah, that makes sense. So, and I'll for a second reading, I'll like think about like this question that's being proposed. I mean, I think for me, like what comes down on the side of like what is most equitable and fair for a struggling taxpayer, right? And so I think if, you don't, in some ways, a discretion of a tax collector would mean that they could take into consideration all the storied circumstances behind that delinquency, and that's important. But at the same time, you don't want, given that kind of agency could potentially be just like problematic, right? Because you want to enshrine certain things in policy in order to make sure that everyone is protected equally. Not to say that like Herb as the delinquent taxpayer doesn't obviously like, I think he's communicated actually that he's a very empathetic tax collector, which is a good thing, I think, absolutely. But so, and I think for me, I'm always on the side of enshrining things and encoding administrative processes into policy, but I don't also want to overburden or control that role of the tax collector. So which is just to say that like I'll take on this question in my thinking for our second reading, and then any other targeted questions for a second reading, I'm also willing to think through.
okay. Any other comments? If not, we've got a motion and a second to approve this as a first read. We'll take a vote. Mary?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
And Claudette's a yes. All right, moving on then to the policy on posting of police standards. Is there anyone willing to make a motion on this one?
I'll do it.
Okay.
Let's see. I move to hear as a first reading for the adoption of a policy on posting of police standards as presented and amended, and to schedule the second reading with possible adoption on July 22nd, 2020.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Mary, seconded by John. So Roger, you want to give a little?
Yeah, I think this should be quick because, and there are amendments that from the packet. I think just really quick, just for members of the public, that this version that you see in the packet is slightly different in the sense that I omitted educational materials and other broader reaches that were talked about at our last meeting. And then I also, through Claudette's suggestion, made sure that the exemptions, the Vermont Public Records Act exemptions, were one of the cited authorities. And so that's in there. And indeed, later on in the background section, it references the exemptions that law enforcement has in that statute. I think additionally, through Herb facilitated a conversation between himself, Chief Frank, and me this afternoon, where I think Chief Frank and she'll, I imagine, will have an opportunity to speak, talked about the importance of like language differences in like the proposed policies, and just I think like ultimately requesting that those words are reflected or grounded in what the department actually has, right? So rather than saying something like standards, you would say something like standard operating procedures, and you would also use key department directives. These were her suggestions, and that was coming from both what is grounded in actual practice, and then in looking at some other police department, other law enforcement agencies. So I think what we should our policy needs to change to say, to reference key department directives and standard operating procedures. And indeed, the use of force or duty to intervene policy, which I believe is SOP 61, that was posted and circulated a little bit for public knowledge, is indeed a standard operating procedure. So it makes sense to use that that language. I think otherwise, I think we were all in agreement that the stated purpose of this policy is of value. And I appreciated the conversation. I think it was helpful in also learning a little bit about how training has an importance and role in police practice, sort of outside of the realm of policy. Chief Frank also updated, just shared some of the own policy work she's done the past year. I think the only thing that will need to come into play for a reading two, and then I'll stop talking, is this idea of the word training that's in there. We just didn't have time to have a full discussion, and Chief Frank was making time because she was effectively, had some calls. She was working, and then someone else was using the Zoom account, right? So we had 40 minutes under the free software. So which was good because we had a focused conversation. But anyway, I digress. The only thing that's left is this idea of training. There's a Rule 13 compliance, she pointed out, which is subject to like different authorities, and which they have their own public posting procedures, and not wanting to get into the messiness of how things change with those authorities. But I was interested in any kind of training that our department may take on that is outside of what's proposed by the Vermont criminal justice authorities, but is unique to our town. Like, where would that go? How would that be posted? I think that's like an open question that we're still discussing. I don't think I'm paraphrasing the full fidelity of our conversation, but luckily Herb and Chief Frank were there, and so they can add anything that I may have missed or I was unclear about. But I think generally we need to amend our motion to reflect key department directives and standard operating procedures, because that is both most accurate that is more accurate, and then to our department, and then it is also most useful for the public. Herb, Chief Frank, is there anything that needs to be added or clarified?
I'm content with the summary.
Go ahead, Chief.
I said I'm content with the summary.
Okay.
And the same thing from me. I felt Roger was very open ears to the suggestions that the chief made, and I was pleased to hear that. And I think vice versa. I think the chief got a better understanding of where Roger was coming with regard to this policy.
Okay. So Roger, you stated you wanted to amend the motion?
Yes, and actually, so let me just look up like the packet, sorry. So in other words, it would say, to make information available online easily accessible to the public in order to educate Norwich residents about law enforcement, standard operating procedures, and key department directives, I think is how the policy should read. And I think for the second, there's still training in the current policy, and I think that could pass through for the first reading, but I think we need to come back to that with the knowledge. I think we need to come back to that a little bit. Miranda also has her hand up, and so does Mary.
Oh, if I could. So the motion appears to have a title of a policy. Is it clear what the title of the policy is? And I don't think it should be a sentence, if that makes any sense.
So you could say it's a policy. So the policy title is a policy requiring the Norwich Police Department to publish standards, policies, procedures, and training online. It could instead read a policy requiring the Norwich Police Department to publish standard operating procedures and key department directives. And you could shorten it to, it could say, the motion could say a policy requiring, a policy on the publishing of police standard operating procedures and key department directives. Is that clear?
Sort of, so long.
It's shorter than it was, Mary, at your request.
No. Good. I'm just trying to absorb it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, this question, I think we'll have a second reading. And so this idea of what a key department directive is, what a standing operating procedure is, what is a temporary directive, I think Chief Frank could talk to us about, right? But I think I'm just summarizing where we are for this first reading. I know
it's a good direction. It's a good direction. I think it needs a little clarity, but I do like the direction you're going in. I'm glad you're collaborating with Herb and Chief Frank too, to sort it out.
Well, I will say that I collaborated first with Claudette because we are.
No, so Claudette, sorry.
So, which is just, and I think that's important because I do think, you know, I think obviously we're all coming from different knowledge claims to to represent our community on this issue, on this policy, but I do think there's a role in policymakers beginning that conversation. And so while I appreciated the call out that we needed to have a conversation, I think it's really appropriate that policymakers who are elected to represent people, you know, could potentially lead these conversations. So
I agree with that. I also think it's important to know what you don't know. And so there's a somewhat of a technical aspect to this as well. So it is appropriate to just learn some of that technical background.
Yeah, it was certainly instructive. And indeed, like other police departments use different words to communicate the same things. And so I found that really, that's why the conversation was useful.
Yes. I'm hoping it can be, that the language can be clear and concise, just so that citizens will know what the result is. Because it does seem as though there is a different language, a different culture. So there needs to be some mediation, I think, to just make it clear and for anybody who wants to access the information.
Indeed, that's the purpose of the policy in some ways, right? And then Chief Frank has her hand up, as does Miranda, Claudette.
I think Miranda was first, and I'm thinking she's probably going to ask the same thing I was. I don't know. I still am completely unsure what the amended motion is.
Right, and were you saying, Roger, that you're amending the title of the policy, or are you amending language in the motion?
Both have to change.
Okay, I guess for my purpose, I just need to know what the motion says.
Yeah, and so the motion needs to be amended, and I can make that motion whenever. I'm happy to make that motion for the group.
Can we retract the original motion first?
Yeah, I will withdraw. Is that how I say it? Withdraw my motion.
And
I don't know if that's formal.
Who was the second one on that?
It was John Langus.
John, are you okay with that?
Yes, I'm fine with that.
Okay. And then Chief, you had your hand up?
I was just speaking to the recommended modification on this end, which would be something along the lines of a policy requiring the Norwich Police Department to publish key department directives and key standard operating procedures. We did not get a chance to talk about training, and I think that's a much larger discussion that we're probably going to have a little more need to further out. So I would have concerns if that was in the first reading that could potentially be moved forward.
Thank you.
I agree that it's a continued conversation. I don't want to drop it for the same reasons you don't want to include it. Of course, it's the one thing that we didn't have time for, so that's where we're at here. Herb or Claudette, do you have suggestions for that?
Why don't, my suggestion would be to read, no, I don't have a suggestion. I take that back. Herb, do you have a suggestion?
Well, the purpose of having a couple readings is the first reading is kind of what you have before you. You've identified some additional information that will result in some amendment to the policy as it's originally drafted. That's the purpose of the second reading, is that you would have the next one in your next packet with the changes. I think that that's the purpose of that. So I think that you could go forward with that. The only thing I would add with regard to the training, and again, I'm not a boots on the ground person on that. So there is additional discussion that has to occur with regard to training. You could either leave it in now with the idea that there's going to be discussion before the 22nd meeting, or you could omit it for right now and continue to have some of that discussion, and then at the second reading decide whether you need to incorporate something in. The only other thing I would say is that in either case, you can always amend your policy down the road. So if there's something that has to come in later on or even taken out, that's the purpose of the amendment process.
So if I'm hearing you, you're saying go with what the motion reads now, because it is the first read, knowing that for the second read, both the title and the content will probably change.
Right, the result of tonight's discussion should be woven into the second reading, yeah.
Yeah, so then we wouldn't necessarily need to withdraw our motion, and I'm comfortable stating in some kind of formalized motion kind of way that further that, I'm happy to carry in the motion that something about, no, because that's inherent in what it is, right? It's just a first read.
So Mary, would you like to make your motion again, just as it's written?
Oh goodness, okay.
The one thing we didn't discuss, otherwise we would have otherwise been perfectly curated in our.
Okay, so just as written here. I move to hear as a first reading for the adoption of a policy on posting of police standards as presented and amended, and to schedule the second reading with possible adoption on July 22nd, 2020.
John, you willing to second that motion again?
I second that motion.
Any further discussion? Okay, then we'll call a vote. Mary?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
And Claudette's a yes. So thank you. Oh. Something just hit my house.
Stick.
I'm just gonna, anyway. Nothing's going off. Okay. The next item on the agenda is the penalty for non-compliance with the homestead declaration. We currently charge an 8% penalty for people who don't file their homestead declaration in time. Different towns charge differently. Some don't penalize at all. Some penalize 4%. Just wondering if anybody is willing to make a motion, or do you want a discussion? We should probably make a motion. So how about if, is there anybody willing to make the motion that we have in front of us, and then we can discuss? Mary.
I move to reaffirm the current 8% penalty. Of the, for non-compliance with the homestead declaration.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Nobody likes it.
I'll second it, just to get the discussion going. So what do select board members think? Leave it, cut it, drop it completely?
I think that it's needlessly punitive. I mean, there's already a 12% annual interest rate as a penalty that attaches to the delinquency. That seems sufficient.
I am in favor of eliminating it completely. But I don't know I don't know if there's, I think for moral reasons, quite frankly, but if there is any revenue or budgetary considerations that I need to make, I would turn to Herb for that, who has his hand up. Claudette.
Just to be clear, this is not the penalty related to lack of paying your property taxes. This is the actual filing of your homestead declaration so that if you have so as a, for instance, in Norwich, the non-homestead tax rate is actually less than the homestead tax rate. So if somebody does not, they're supposed to file their homestead declaration. If they don't, they're getting the non-residential rate, or the non-homestead rate. So this is solely penalty related to not filing that declaration. It has nothing to do with the payment of your taxes and the delinquency after your second installment.
So I didn't actually realize that. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, the homestead declaration is something you have to file with your taxes.
Yeah.
Well, it's not part of your taxes. It's a separate
right. They link
document.
Yeah.
It's a separate declaration that is typically due when the same day as your taxes are due.
Income.
If you do not file, or your filing is incomplete, or or for whatever reasons, it doesn't get to the Department of Taxes, the town can penalize those people 8% per.
Up to 8% of their help me out here, Cheryl. Hold on.
I'm going to mute Cheryl.
It's the
education tax liability on the property. Sorry.
Right. Yeah. Right. And there's a lot of work that goes on, I will add, on behalf of the staff of a town when homestead declarations are not filed on time. And, it requires reissuing tax bills. It costs, time, money, postage. And there is an appeal process, so people can appeal. So, but I think if you make a decision not to, you can't hold the next board to that decision. It's always up for an annual decision. But anyway, I would support keeping it.
Mary?
I'd support keeping it too. That I just don't think if you're doing your taxes, it is linked. It's pretty obvious that it's there. There are lots of reminders. And I think it's just sort of gets people's attention. If you know that you have that, maybe you're going to pay attention.
But so, it's the 8% versus something else.
Well, it could be, maybe it would be 5%, but I think something noticeable would be good.
John?
So a year or two ago, there was a circumstance where one of our neighbors had recently become a widow. Her husband had always dealt with this, and she thought it was taken care of, and it wasn't. And so, I think that the problem with this is that it wasn't written up to have any sort of discretion, and that is presumably because people didn't want, doing favors for friends or something like that. I'm sure there was a legitimate reason, but it's quite punitive. But
well, in that case, is there a way, as Cheryl said, you could have an appeal? Is there just a way that it mainly gets people's attention, but if there's special circumstances, they could be worked out?
They would have to appeal.
They'd have to appeal, but that is available, right?
Yes, it is.
Cheryl has her hand up.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Cheryl.
Yeah. Right, there is an appeal process, and last year we handled one at the Lister's office, and we granted the appeal and the fee was waived. Should the listers not, it goes on to the BCA, and there's an opportunity for the select board to consider removing it for any hardship cases. So there are several options for this, but again, it's an annual requirement that just gets done with your taxes, but you don't even have to wait to do your taxes. There's no benefit to waiting to do your taxes to file your homestead declaration. You can go online and do it, and you're done, and then file your taxes on the 15th of April like you used to.
Rob, do you have any thoughts?
No, as long as the appeal process is there and it's used successfully on occasion, that would work for me.
Roger, change in thoughts, or are you still?
Well, I mean, it seems like the consent, so it seems like, I think John and I are saying at the very least it's unnecessary punitive, right? So like maybe we may wish to look at ways to make it less punitive. And I think there's actually lots of circumstances that, someone wouldn't have the ability to go through appeal process. Like if they're missing their homestead declaration, they may very well be missing an appeal process. Now Herb has his hand up as well as Cheryl. The only thing I will say is maybe you want to reconsider the 8%. I do understand that it's on a non-homestead, but I don't really know if I'm comfortable making distinctions between homestead and non-homestead.
That's a tax.
But no, I know. I understand the tax terms, but I think like it's laden with inherent value judgment, right? People who live here full time, people who don't live here full time, so like potentially. So no,
the non-homestead tax rate is like a business or
second home.
Yeah, it's your second home, right? So if you but I think also, I think it's complicated, as I guess what I'm realizing. But Herb has his hand up. And so
Herb, go ahead. Sorry, just pointing out the hardship. There's not necessarily all kinds of. There's probably all kinds of excuses, but there's not necessarily all kinds of true hardships. The statute that was in your packet identifies the hardships, and which is what the listers are the appellate board first of all, and then it goes to the BCA if it goes further. Yeah. But it's basically, active military duty, serious illness or disability, serious for a family member as well, and then fire, flood, or disaster. So in the situation that John Lang has talked about earlier, where there's a death in the family, that's clearly meets the hardship criteria. But something along the lines of saying, well, I was out of town, so I couldn't file it because I was in my second home somewhere else. That's not a hardship that meets the test. So admittedly, the hardship is going to be a function of the interpretation of the listers initially, and then the BCA. Right. But there is a limited scope in terms of what is appealable, or what you'll get an appeal, a winning appeal on. So I think it still boils down to really, do you want to do the full 8% or something less than that? What's a reasonable amount to charge that still provides the incentive for folks to file their homestead declaration, but not to the point of being overly punitive.
Yeah, and I think what we're just saying is it's instructive that we choose as a community to do the absolute max. That's all. So Cheryl has her hand up.
That may have been from before, but I guess I would just say that this, long ago when all this began, Roger, in a galaxy far away, there was no reason for people to be truthful, to file your homestead declaration. So it took a while for the towns and the state to grapple with this topic. And that's why it became a statute. And there was some enforcement needed because, as Herb said, if you're in a town where the non-residential rate is lower, why declare your homestead? You get a lower tax bill. Well, then, other things come along from that. And the state actually sends a list to the listers to review, to determine if we have knowledge of anybody that is a resident that didn't file. and we can give it back to the state, and then the next steps occur. But
Yeah.
it's been a long process for clerks and treasurers and listers.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
So-
Like, I appreciate that context.
Madam Chair.
Yes, John.
So, yeah, I appreciate the clarification on the appeals process, Cheryl. I had forgotten that because I think that actually did come into play with the woman that I'm remembering. So two things. What if we cut it in half and see if there's any difference in the number of people who don't do it? We could certainly do that. And the other thing was I was confused by this because I thought we were so the policy we just talked about, the tax collection policy, it has an 8% penalty in the delinquent payment section. So I thought we were talking about that as well, which that is on top of 1.5% per month. So I guess we weren't talking about both of those. So I'd like to have that be something that when we do the second reading of that, because again, I definitely find that to be punitive there. But I'd support if people were willing to cut it in half and see if that makes any difference. As Cheryl says, apparently this gets said every year, so could easily jump back if that creates an issue.
Any other comments?
Is this money that we get directly, or does it go through some like algorithm that the state has, or anything like that? The only other question.
I don't know. Does it come to us directly, Cheryl?
It does. Because it goes onto the amended tax bill. There's an amount that's put on there as the penalty, and then maybe that goes through some state calculation, and we get a portion of it. But I thought this was ours. I'm going to be careful that because you guys said it. It must be ours.
It is. It's ours right above the hardship in the statute. A municipality may retain any penalties and interest assessed and collected in accord with this section.
Right, correct. So it is. And again, there's a ton of work that goes into this, by the way. I can't emphasize enough. It requires really good, strong communications between the finance office and the listers to make sure the appeal process is handled on a timely basis.
The only other question I'll have. And then
Before Roger, Mary had her hand up before you did. Sorry.
Just besides the incentive factor on the 8%, does it have any relationship at all to the work that has to be done if a person files late? So in other words, it's not really like a revenue stream of any kind. Is it just purely to incentivize people to be on time with their declaration?
Herb has his hand up, but that was kind of my question.
Who did? Who does?
Herb has his hand up.
Go ahead, Herb.
Oh yes, there is when we have to go through a revised bill process. So if the bills have gone out, someone files late, we get notice at some point from the state that they've switched from a non-residential to a homestead. We have to go through the process of sending out a revised tax bill, which it's staff time, it's an envelope, it's a reprinting of a bill. It's not insurmountable, but that's a piece of what's going on. But the underlying thing to this too is that, keep in mind, the state wants its education funding. So in the town of Norwich, where our homestead rate is higher than the non-residential, if everybody was just filing non-residential, the state would get less money for the education fund. So that's a piece of this. It's not just the municipal side of stuff that goes into this, but the state is recognizing that the municipality is doing its collection work for them.
Correct.
So therefore they give us the benefit of, the penalty and any related interest.
So I want to kind of wrap this up, and we have a motion and a second. Roger, you want to make one final?
I have a question. Is this on our fee schedule? Is this attributed revenue do we budget revenue for this, with this?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm going to call the question. So the motion was to reaffirm the 8% penalty. Mary, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Roger?
No.
Rob?
Yes.
John?
No.
And Claudette's a yes. So still an 8%. Thank you, everybody. I know it's, and I'm not going to comment anymore. Town manager report. We have a written report in our packet. Anybody have any questions for the town manager about that report? Mary?
Just briefly on the Blue Ribbon Commission, I don't know if this is possible, but just have someone who can listen. Someone who can listen to persons who might want to come forward about incidents, but they need to have a kind of sheltered way to do it. So it's just an idea, and I don't know if it's even necessary. But.
The idea, that while it's not structured yet, the idea is in these kinds of things that usually there's a level of solicitation of ideas from the public at large. That may be in a larger setting. It may be, giving opportunity to put out there if somebody wants to say something quietly that they could pull a member aside or what have you. Or yes, the idea is that this would be not only a listening group, but also a group that ultimately from that listening would make some recommendations that can be applicable to the town as a whole. But ideally what it's somewhat selfish on my part. I'm trying to find ways as a town manager to do stuff with regard to racism and equity and the national discussion that's going on to say what can we do Norwich that is that out of my office that's proactive but doable. And because that for me that's really critical. You don't write a zoning ordinance that you can't enforce. So the same thing, I don't want to get recommendations that I can't do. So that's and we're just very much in the infancy. I don't have a full charge drafted yet, but I have a good collective of folks that are willing to do this. I'm not sure that it's an all-encompassing list yet of folks. Just the list that I had in there were just things that I was thinking of off the top of my head to spark interest, idea, or whatever when I'm basically trying to sell somebody to be on the group that I'm forming. And I'm purposely I'm in the style of a blue ribbon committee, but it's not going to be called a blue ribbon committee.
Right.
Especially after the Atlantic Monthly came out and said that the next Blue Ribbon Committee is not going to be the solution to this. So I was dismayed the very day after I was thinking about it. But the tenor of a Blue Ribbon Committee is the ultimate purpose. Yeah.
So
Roger, you had a question? So
Herb, finish that title of that Atlantic article. A Blue Ribbon Committee is not going to solve what?
That had a focus on law enforcement issues, I believe. Sorry, I'm just trying to look at it right.
Yes.
Right here.
And so what is the proposed makeup of this committee?
So the proposed
so that's rhetorical. That's rhetorical.
Oh, sorry.
I read it, right?
Yeah.
So I would say, you had expressed a desire to take on racism independent of a body politic, which I think includes citizens. And so I would encourage you.
Body politic is the select board and any select board member. They will not be on that committee.
And I don't think that you should have town employees either. I think town employees and other institutions can be invited into the conversation, but I believe that your committee should be the full diversity of our citizenry. And I recognize that some of those employees are also citizens, but that is my recommendation.
Right.
Right. And I understand it's your committee,
right.
But
I appreciate that. And that's part of the struggle that I had. I know that some of the discussion is going to evolve into law enforcement, and this committee is not going to be just looking at law enforcement, but I have a feeling it's going to become somewhat part of the discussion. So that's why I specifically want Jennifer on there, and because Jennifer is a woman. There are other individuals that are part of this. I specifically asked Alex, not because he's an employee, but because because of his race. The same thing with Bree. There are other individuals that I've asked because they come from mixed race families, or they've had a story that I've heard from behind the scenes that is something that plays into it. So for the group, and then there's a couple people that I've interacted with really well with, such as Melissa Horwitz, who's now the chair of the Planning Commission, and Kate Barlow, who I've worked with the Norwich Farms related stuff. So, and Melissa is an attorney and works for the Human Rights Commission for the state of Vermont. We've already worked out doing some non-bias training that her executive director does. So we're doing that as a side for all employees. So that's the start of that particular process. And that group I have asked that group to, come up with other names or suggestions that there might be. So the purpose of some of the staff on there is not necessarily, other than Jennifer, the staff is not there because of their staff. It's because of their the representation of their sector of the population.
And I would hope that the staff that you have invited are well aware of that.
Absolutely. This is not a situation where they just come and listen to what I say and then say, oh yeah, he's my boss, so therefore that's what I have to do. This is an independent group, and if anything that they recommend is independent from their employment.
But it can't be an independent group by virtue of what you just said prior to that statement. So I think
we can have the argument all day long, but I'm putting together a group that's going to have certain individuals on it that are my invitees. You're welcome to make suggestions to me, and I'm happy to deal with that. The idea, again, is to find stuff that helps to address the conversation, and again, to help keep the community. It's also intended to have community undertows in a good situation for the community. So the best of intentions is there from that standpoint. I know that I'm a pretty fair-handed person when it comes to stuff. I think staff can tell you that they can talk to me openly from that standpoint, and I think that can be taken into an independent situation.
Yeah, I this wasn't an agenda item, so I'll step away. But I mean, I think Miranda's taking notes, so my note would be that Roger Arnold believes that the proposed makeup of the so-called Blue Ribbon Committee is inherently flawed.
And that's why I purposely don't have body politic as part of this group.
Any other questions for the select board? I mean, for the town manager?
Just one other thing, Claudette, because it's part of it. Because I identified the tax related stuff in there, more for those folks that are dealing with it. We just did get the tax rates emailed to us yesterday. So we're just awaiting the last bit of the Lister related process, and you'll be able to then set the tax rate. And again, for those that are watching, it looks like the way things are going, we would have a tax rate out there such that the first installment would be done toward the end of August rather than the original August 14th date. So everything seems to be on target. But I just want to make sure that's more for, you guys all know it, but it's more for those that are watching this after the fact.
And I just wanted to point out to the board that this will probably require, unless we want to get even further behind on tax payments, a very brief special select board meeting as soon as we get all of our data together to be able to make those calculations.
Yeah, and I've already started working on the matrix for that tax calculation.
So I do have a couple questions, Herb, on your report. Primarily, actually, some of it's from Alex's report. There was a comment in there about repairs to the ladder truck, which I thought we were seriously considering selling and not put any money into it.
Right. So
if you could just, I don't expect an answer tonight, but I would appreciate finding out what the heck's going on there.
Yep. I have an answer for that, but I think it would probably be good to have the chief come in and describe what's going on there. And
And unless he has the absolute documented evidence that it's going to impact our insurance rates,
Yeah.
I'm not going to buy that argument.
Yeah, we went out, we've solicited the ISO, the last two ISO valuations. So there is a net savings to the community as a whole, not from our related tax sort of standpoint, but for insurance of all the individuals that are out there. The actual issue with the ladder was actually hydraulics and not the actual truck itself. So which was a surprise to me. No one really checked it out appropriately, but that we can have the chief and or Matt Sweat in to describe anything further on that, should you choose to. So,
and then I have
not just pride.
But it gets down to the whole question of, and I'm not going to go further. Please.
Yep.
Yeah. My second question is around budget season. We had this ongoing discussion about how desperately we needed to replace culverts. From Larry's reports for the last 2 months, we haven't done a one. So I'm just questioning why. We had a very dry spring, which seemed to me would have been an extremely opportune time to start replacing culverts. And I'm not, not asking for an answer right now. I just want you to know that I have that question and I would like an answer.
Yep.
And that's all I had.
Thanks.
Any other comments or questions for Herb? Hearing and seeing none, we're down to the pavement marking agenda item. Is anyone willing to make a motion?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Thank you, Mary.
I move to authorize the expenditure of up to $24,988.40 for pavement marking, and to authorize the town manager to execute a contract with L&D Safety Marking to complete the work.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion made by Mary, seconded by John. Any questions, comments from anybody? Seeing none, we'll take a vote. Mary?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
And Claudette's a yes. So then, and I just want the public to know, in case they didn't read the packet, that is not going to cover all of, if I recall, that quote will not cover all of our pavement marking needs.
Correct. It definitely does not cover it all. But I've told Larry, Larry has to take in consideration public safety first. So where the highest public safety issues are. So it'll probably be more in the village area. It'll be sort of the yellow lines, but not inclusive of some fog lines. And it may not include the whole town.
Okay.
But we're doing the best. We're doing as much coverage as we can.
Yeah. In case people forget, that's a line item in his budget. So that's why. Tech upgrade report is, we have a motion associated with this. Anybody willing to take on that?
Before you made the meeting, we agreed to sort of take this off, but I would give you a little update.
Okay.
And so basically, Rob and I have met to talk about things. We believe that we can carve this up a little bit into different phases, but I think with the cost of some of the things that we're talking about, there's more discussion to be had, and whether we do more of an all or what is the phased approach, as well as the related IT. And I think that this is probably more best done during the budget season, or at least leading up to the budget season, having some information as part of it. Because I'm leery about the money that's involved with this, and what I will probably do in the interim. I've already tried to start some discussions with our current IT person to try to address some of the red areas in the assessment, to see if we can button up some of that. So that I think there's some things that I can be able to do, but I may need to go outhouse to get some of that done as well. But I would come to you in situations where there was something of any consequence with regard to money, other than just, you know, having an IT person switch something around or what have you. I just think I think this is a bigger issue that potentially could blossom, and I don't know where your feelings are with regard to this whole thing yet, and I think it's worth more of a discussion as part of the budget process.
Okay. Any questions from the board? If not, then we have a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made by Mary, seconded by Rob, and I just want to, before we vote, point out on the agenda what are some of our possible July 22nd agenda items will be. And okay, we'll take a vote. We'll take a moat. Mary, how do you moat? How do you vote?
I vote mess.
Roger?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
All right. Thanks, guys.
See you in a couple weeks,
Thanks.
if not sooner. Enjoy your time off. Couple of days off you're taking, Herb, I hear?
Yes, just trying to get some time with my wife for a couple days. Yep.